This is me going to the Capitol to interview some state representatives on the school funding issue. What evidence do you have that school vouchers will improve student outcomes statewide?
What evidence do I have that?
School vouchers will improve student outcomes statewide.
So, the answer to that question is probably a twofold question, which is the first issue is whether or not the government has a vested interest to educate our children, which I think we all agree on. The second question is whether or not parents have a vested interest or the most knowledge of what their child not just wants but needs to thrive. And there's an anecdote that I've used, but it really sums it up. Last September, I was at the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, Democratic Organization Casino Night. And my wife and I, Erica, were sitting with three Latinas at a blackjack table, started talking. And like, I've become that stereotypical parent that I used to like make fun of. Oh, here are my kids, do you have kids? We all had kids. And I wasn't trying to do an aha gotcha moment. I just said, you love your kids? And they said, of course I do. You want the very best for your child? Of course I do. And I said, no rhetoric aside, no like political agenda. If for whatever reason your child wasn't thriving in the school they're in, I'm not even attacking the school. I mean, just for the purpose the child is not thriving in that school, would you want the ability to take your child and put them somewhere where you believe they would thrive? And they all said yes. And I said, would you want a portion of the taxes or of funding that is used to educate our children collectively, that's a government duty and responsibility, to follow your child so that your child can thrive? And they all said yes. And I personally believe school choice comes down to that issue as well as the greater argument of how do we get education as a whole for our kids? Because, you know, the other question, I'm going off tangent, but I think it's relevant. When I was block walking, knocked thousands and thousands and thousands of doors, and a lot of people would tell me, you don't care about education, you're Republican. And I said, well, you're entitled to your opinion, but with all due respect, I personally believe that we should all have a healthful distrust of the government. Not like crazy distrust, but we should question. And the only way that we have people that question is when we educate our children who then become adults to think for themselves. And so I became passionate about school. My oldest daughter was 8 when I met her, and I started doing homework with her. And I say back then, because I think now all the schools have iPads or notepads. We had a book still. And there was an example on top, and then like 10 or 12 problems that they had to do. If it wasn't almost exactly like that sample problem, she had no idea. Happened the first night, happened the second night, it just kept happening. And I basically told her, I mean, a little differently because she was only 8 or 9 at the time, but I said, I don't care if we disagree, I don't care if you get it wrong, but I care if you can reason through, if you can think things through. And so the big issue, I think, with regard to school choice is our children statewide aren't at the levels they need to be to read. They aren't at the levels they need to be to do math. They aren't at the levels they need to be to do a lot of things that they need to. And so I think the response to your question is ultimately this. It's not just as simple as the ESA program or the ESA bill. There is a funding bill, there is a teacher's bill of rights bill, there are a number of bills that are trying to address I think frustrations and issues, whether real or imagined, and I'm not saying that my beliefs are fake and yours are fake, I just think we have a different opinion on the goal, but I think not on the goal, on how to get to the goal. I think our goal is the same. I think we all want to ensure that education is the best it can be in Texas. And I'll tell you this, I've met with, and Sebastian can verify, I've met with like 10 or 12 groups that are either schools, trustees, anti-school choice. And I tell them, I said, good news and bad news. Bad news is obviously, I believe in school choice. The good news is I'm in the minority of the majority, which means that I've been saying this when I first got in the race back in, was it June? I don't remember, but I got into it very early on. I want to give schools whatever money that they need, right? And I tell them all, I say, look, I'm not saying this is the truth. I'm just telling you what the arguments that they're making against it. And give me the ammunition so I can help. Here's the arguments that they make. Schools take on unreasonable debt. Schools spend their money unfiduciarily, unwisely. They're growing administrations at an unreasonable rate as compared to the teachers. The fourth is not really one you can really prove or disprove because it's not a black and white issue. It's like this propaganda political argument. And I tell them, I personally believe this. I want to give schools as much money as they need, and I don't want the government's fingers in it. The problem is that a lot of this funding is coming and saying you have to spend it on this and you have to spend it on that, and as opposed to just giving them a budget like to run a business. And so I've told them, it's not a "I got you" moment. Give me the ammunition to be your advocate. And so what I believe, so here's one of the arguments that both sides make. One argument says the only thing that we get is the basic allotment. TEA and other groups will say that no, like in 121, the funding is $15,708. They can't both be true. And so let's start with facts and not propaganda, not for either side, like not pro school choice propaganda. And propaganda is probably the wrong word because that makes it sound like it's the bullet point arguments versus like the meat, the itty gritty, right? Like I met with other people on other bills where they'll give me percentages. I'm like, I don't want a percentage. I want the raw data because percentages can be played with. I want the raw data. And I've asked every single group, please provide me this. How much funding that you've had or you've received, your students, and where the funding is going. Because if you're spending it wisely, I can be an advocate to say, hey, listen, at least in my district or whatever district will provide it to me, at least in these districts, they're spending it wisely. And I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to try to embarrass them, but that's been the last, 3 or 4 weeks, 3 weeks? No one has provided it to me. Now, I'm not saying it's not true. I mean, I'm busy. I mean, you look at my desk. I mean, I'm working harder than I ever have, and I'm sure they're busy. School year, they're working hard too. But I need data to convince and advocate for them. Because they also told me something that I think is very true. Well, it's unfair when we are given unfunded mandates, or they give us X amount for a mandate, but they underfund us. And so now we're taking additional money that we're supposed to be using for this, for that. And I say, that's a very great point. It's a sad point, but it's great if it's true. Show it to me so I can be your advocate. That makes sense?
Yes.
Did I answer your question? I mean, I wasn't trying to go off,
Yeah.
but I think it kind of sums up a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. How can lower income families afford the tuition vouchers aren't going to cover?
Okay. So a couple things. One, the ESA bill isn't just for private school. The ESA bill is for homeschooling and other forms of education that are pre-approved under the statute. And so the logic behind why they came up with the amount that it was is that we're not here to, you can't fund everything. I mean, this isn't a world where you're saying, hey, let's go to St. Mary's Hall, that's $50,000 a year here. They had to try to calculate an amount statewide, just like they kind of do for the public education funding, to help families achieve that goal. Like, are there schools that cost more than that? There are. Are there schools that cost less? I'm sure homeschooling families could do it with the bells and whistles and spend through the roof. There's homeschool families that can spend less. Unfortunately, in government, and not just with school choice or not just with education, but with everything, there is no perfect fix for anything, right? Like, when I came to this job, I expected some really hard balancing acts. I thought that would just be a couple of big bills or a couple of big emotional policies. I'm finding it on almost everything because nothing's perfect. I mean, we've killed. By killed means that we got our draft back on some legislation that we didn't submit, because looking at it, I'm thinking, yeah, it's well intentioned, but it's not doing what it needs to do, or it's violating the laws or the principles that I believe I'm here to advocate for. And when I'm on committee listening to bills to vote on or not vote on, from a wide range of stuff, whether it's I'm on 3 committees. I'm on transportation, I'm on JCJ, judiciary and civil jurisprudence, and I'm on family and fiduciary. And I've heard emotional testimony, some well-intentioned bills and ideas that, I'm thinking, well, there's not a balancing act, but it's a balance because life isn't perfect. And it's like, well, how do I give as much justice here and as much justice here and try to advance justice as best as possible? And it's difficult to get, there's no perfect anything. There's a saying I've learned here, not just, I think it applies to probably every bill, every law, probably most ideas, is that don't let perfect be the devil or the opponent of good. And I've even told the groups, I said, if we can't get as much funding as we need, and you're not going to get to me for this session, get it to me in the interim, and if I come back, I'll start advocating with the reps and being a loud vocal advocate to get it. Because I don't believe either side doesn't want to fund education fully. I honestly believe that. I think there's a disconnect on what both sides believe, and they both can't be true. Maybe they both are true. Maybe schools are underfunded and they're being mismanaged. Maybe it's a little bit of both, I don't know. But that's what my goal is. Like, whether it's this session or in 2 years or 4 years, is to not stop advocating until we make sure that our education system is the best it can be. I believe government, and I think this applies not just to school choice, but government as a whole. I think government has lost its sight on what its role and duties are. So I believe on working on the ground up. Your foundations come first. So for me, as a husband, a father, business owner, as a prepper, I'm most focused collectively on, is there a food supply? Is there clean water? Is there electricity? Is there safety? Is there education? These core motives that government has to fulfill, like they're obligated to us, the people, to fulfill. Then, after you have fully funded those and you've fully taken care of those, and if you have money left over to spend, then you start spending in other places. Now, the other reality is, this is my first session, appropriations and spending have been going on for years and years and years and years, and so there's a lot of digging to get through it, because Texas, even though we are one of the most successful economies, I think we're 7th or 8th in the world, competing against countries as well, we still have we don't have unlimited resources. So every biennium, we have X amount that we can divvy up for everything from education, both higher and public schools, or K through 12, I should say, for transportation, for security, for all these things that we have to focus on. So that I'm trying to kind of give you how my brain works.
Yeah. Will the new budget cover the loss of COVID funds?
No, so the ESSER funds, where the federal ESSER funds were supposed to be short-term supplemental funds that to help with the loss of attendance, loss of revenue. It was supposed to supplement it. What some schools, and I'm not saying all, but what some schools did, or at least the fear is that some of these schools used it for more long-term programs. So, like, example, I'll use my family. My family's on a fixed budget on what our expenses are. If I have a great month, or I have a great, I get tax return, I get some kind of money back, I consider that, I can call people on, it's a windfall. I would not take that surplus or that windfall that I have and then readjust my budget and say, okay, I have this much money, I can spend it all the time. And this is not just with education, this is government as a whole, humans as a whole. Government's made up of people, which is why I say we should distrust the government, because people are flawed, and I believe the masses of people collectively get it right. Because our interests are truly our interests, right? Like, when we're outside of this world, we are truly focused on our immediate needs. When you go into the courtroom or you go into the Capitol, there's a lot of other competing interests that are affecting people. And so I say all that to come back to what you're saying. They didn't specifically address the loss of funds from the ESSER, because ESSER was never meant to be long-term, it was supposed to be emergency. I believe that the current proposal, and of course we haven't gotten to the floor for amendments, the current proposal is an additional infusion of, I think it's $7.5 billion for public education. And again, like, I've been advocating for more. I've met with a bunch of schools, and in my mind, it was a good point. We haven't adjusted the basic allotment with inflation since its last adjustment. That makes sense to me, to whatever we deem is the amount that someone needs, whatever business it is, whatever that cost is, adjust for inflation, because like anything else in life, if it costs more to do it, but you get the same amount of money, you have less money to do the same services, which becomes more and more difficult as that increases. Now, coming back to the practical argument, which is, and I haven't confirmed this, but I was told, so disclaimer, that for every $100 of the basic allotment, our total appropriated money for education goes up like $1.1 to $1.2 billion. And so to go $1,000 in basic allotment increases it like, what was it, $11 billion, I think my math's right. 1.1 times 10 is 11 to $12 billion. The other argument is average daily attendance versus enrollment. And again, I want to advocate, and I'm not just saying this, like, I'm not saying this to win people over, because I'm never going to placate people that disagree with me on this issue. So I'm never going to get their vote, and I'm probably going to lose votes on people that are against it. So this isn't a smart thing to think about or to advocate for if I'm trying to be a smart politician and get reelected. But I believe I want to find what's best and what's true and advocate for it. And so I believe I've been consistent in politics. My view is kind of like my view on my religion, which is I welcome conversations with people that don't believe my faith. I challenge them, not challenge them in a confrontational way, but I challenge them to convert me, because I don't want to believe what I want to believe. I want to believe the truth. And that applies, and I apply that principle to politics, meaning that I have certain beliefs, full spectrum of politics. And I don't want to come into it with confirmation bias and be shut off to an argument that I might realize I'm wrong on. And in fact, I have changed my mind on certain issues or on certain bills where I said no at first, and I thought it over and talked with my office, talked with my staff. And so that conversation needs to happen as well. I don't believe I'm a nobody, I'm a fish. I'm a freshman. But I don't believe that conversation is going to happen this session, the ADA versus enrollment. But I don't think that argument is shut off. And I think that argument only happens in conjunction with full disclosure of finances. Otherwise, then we go back to the same argument where the government's always sticking their fingers into it. And I don't want that. I want less. I mean, there has to be some government interaction, but I want less, not more. So hopefully that answers your question.
Going back to the COVID funds, where is this money coming from?
The COVID funds?
Or the $7.5 billion?
From our money.
Okay.
Well, from the state, which is all of our money.
Should private schools receiving vouchers be required to take the STAR test or follow the same reporting standards?
So STAR is a funny thing. So I have found that just like the TEA, neither side likes STAR. So ideologically, politically, the the left or the right don't like it. And so the first question is, what are we going to replace STAR with, right? Because I personally, I'm not speaking for the state of Texas, this is me, Marc LaHood. Testing is a tricky animal because you have to have some way of gauging whether or not we're actually learning or we're actually achieving the goals that we are trying to achieve. But then you can quickly fall into the trap of trying to train for the goals versus actually thinking, which takes back to my daughter. I believe they were teaching my daughter and her classmates how to answer this question versus how to think it through. That make sense?
Yes.
And so I don't have, full disclosure, I don't have a perfect solution answer on the whole STAR situation. There has to be a way of gauging that it is in fact working. Because the proposition, government has some restrictions, right? Even people that are advocating for freedom aren't saying we can do whatever we want, whenever we want. I think when you take all the noise from the whole sides, the whole surrounding thing, I believe everyone is asking for accountability and results. And my hope is, like I said, over the next year, hopefully before we vote on it, I'm working my butt off on it, but we could have more like conversations where, and I know it's a very emotional argument. I don't get mad at people coming here and literally yell at me, but yelling at somebody isn't going to have isn't going to have meaningful conversations. Like I use the Bible, and I don't know what y'all's faith are, but I believe this is the Word of God. And if I went up to someone who's not a believer and I said, "You idiot! You're a heathen idiot! You believe," they're gonna be like, "I'm never gonna believe." And I think largely that same argument or that same approach is happening in a lot of realms in politics. And if your goal is to really bring people together and really figure a solution, that's not the approach. The approach is a conversation. Figuring out, hey, you know what? We have a lot in common. Like, even though we disagree on school choice, I do think we want the same goal. We want to make sure that our schools are the best they can be. We want to make sure that our schools are funded. I think not most importantly, but equally important is our children and our teachers, because our teachers are the ones that our children are entrusted to, right? Like, I don't believe government has a right to invade the family. But part of education that we can't talk about is education starts at home with the parents. And without getting political or theological, the reality is home life is not what it was. We have broken families or single parents, and I'm not talking bad. My wife was my daughter was 8 when I met her because my wife's from a prior relationship. I adopted her in 2017, but we have people working 2 jobs or 3 jobs. I mean, I'm not faulting them, but we have a change in the home life that affects the later life. Like, education starts at home, with whether you start reading to them, teaching them manners, self-discipline, behavioral stuff. All that stuff starts at the home, and then when they get to the school age, we give them to school to be like in Latin, loco parentis. Like, me personally, there are 3 teachers that changed my life: Mrs. Wenninger, Prof. Bradley, and Mr. Muniam. And I think teachers have gotten a bad rap, kind of like police officers. Not to be too political, but I think police officers have. They do a thankless job that we don't appreciate and compensate them for it. I think that conversation is starting to happen now. In a perfect world, it would have never happened. It never would have been an issue to happen now, but better late, in my mind, better late than never. Which comes back to kind of the argument of, do we keep moving the needle forward, or do we focus on an all or nothing solution, where if we don't get what we want now, we're gonna burn it down, versus keep moving forward, trying to progress, trying to grow, trying to unite, trying to figure out where we unite, where we disagree on. As a lawyer, maybe I have a unique aspect, because I do mostly criminal defense, but I do a little civil also. But the same principles apply. So I have an ethical, legal duty to advocate for my clients. Not just my belief, but I could lose my license if I don't represent to the best of my ability and protect their rights. So when I go into negotiation with a prosecutor or opposing counsel, I want the whole world for my client. And the opposing counsel, opposing side wants the opposite. They want the whole world over here, whether it's incarceration or it's money or denial or whatever it is. And any great mediator will tell you that at the end of a mediation, if both sides are not really super happy, but they can live with it, that's a good mediation. Meaning that in a perfect world, these people are moving their goals here. These people are moving their goals here. No one is overly one way or the other. Now, it's not a perfect example because it doesn't exactly apply, but kind of the mentality of what I believe needs to start happening in politics is, more talking, like, commercials and mailers and all that stuff is useful to some degree. In both my campaigns, I prioritize block walking and forums, like meeting with y'all. Like, I knew y'all weren't supporters of me. I'm not going to avoid you. I'm going to have a conversation with you. I want to hear what your concerns are. I mean, you haven't told me you've been asking me questions about what I believe, but I want to hear what your concerns are and see if there's a way that I can figure out how to advocate for it. And that's not just for school choice. I am elected to serve the people as a whole. Now, you can't represent everyone perfectly because you have competing interests and beliefs, but you try to service the entire community as best as possible. And that only starts if I take the time to really listen to people, to hear their concerns. I'm not going to agree with everything, and they're not always going to agree with me, whether I'm right or they're right or whatever it is, but that has to be the starting point. And then we use that approach to bring others, so other representatives or other groups into it, and ask for information so we can try and get the most accurate model or information we can to try and get it as right as we can. And if it's not perfect, which it's never going to be perfect in life, then you come back and you say, okay, well, this needs to be tweaked. Let's get information on this, and let's figure out how to get that one, and you keep moving the goalpost. So, sorry, I'm probably answering a lot more than you.
What would you say to a public school teacher worried about larger class sizes because of school choice?
Larger class sizes in what way? What I mean is, when I met with a couple of schools and toured them, and I asked them, are there studies on what the perfect ratio of teacher to student ratio is? And there are some studies on what it is. I think everyone's an advocate that you want a smaller teacher to student ratio, right? It just makes sense. There's more attention you can actually focus on the child.